So yeah, if you're gonna push record, do you want to let me know when, or should I just start?
I did.
Okay, great. So hello everyone, and welcome to Beyond Library Diversity Residencies, Strategies to Recruit, Retain, and Promote Librarians of Color webinar, a part of a series of online discussions brought to you by the ACRL University Libraries Section's Professional Development Committee. I am Samantha Sam Harlow, the online learning librarian at UNC Greensboro and a member of the committee. I will be moderating this program along with my colleague Rebecca Graff, who's the research librarian at Southern Methodist University Libraries. This is one of an ongoing series of online programs sponsored by our committee, and at the end of the session, I will give you more information about upcoming programs. This session is being recorded, and when the recording is ready, we will send the link to the video to everyone who registered for the program. The program today will consist of approximately 45 minutes of presentation from our panelists, followed by a question and answer session. Please post your questions in the chat box, and we will collect all of them and answer as many as we can at the end. We will post a link to a program assessment in the chat box after the Q&A session. So please take a few moments to give us your feedback on today's program. So with those announcements out of the way, I am very happy to start today's program. We are joined today by three presenters. Jessica Dye is a diversity resident librarian at West Virginia University and is interested in open education, critical librarianship, feminist and critical pedagogies, as well as anti-racism and anti-oppression. Grace Adeneye is currently the Pauline A. Young resident at the University of Delaware, serving in reference and instruction. Jesus Espinoza is a resident librarian at the University of Michigan, where he works in instruction, outreach, and engagement. And without further delay, I will hand it over to our panel.
Okay, hello everyone, good morning. Thank you for being here. So welcome to Beyond Library Diversity Residencies, Strategies to Recruit, Retain, and Promote Librarians of Color. Before introducing ourselves individually, we just wanted to go over kind of the origin and inspiration for this presentation. We met at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro Diversity Resident Institute last September. The Institute is a grant-funded program that's meant to orient new residents to best practices in getting the most out of their residency experiences, and also provide them with a professional network of colleagues nationally. We're thankful that UNCG created the space that allowed us this opportunity to meet and collaborate. This webinar is also based on our own personal reflections within our residency experiences and our own visions. We also recognize and are grateful for the ways in which our residencies have helped us to further our careers. We would like to acknowledge that residencies are the first step. Today we seek to discuss ways to build upon this work and think more critically about retention and promotion for librarians of color. And then two more technical notes. We'll be using Poll Everywhere throughout the webinar. So if you have a device handy, you can participate. You can either text in or use a web browser to participate, and the links will be provided for that. And then we also wanted to mention that we'll keep our videos on for our individual introductions, but then just so that there's less moving parts, we're going to turn them off for the rest of the webinar. Awesome. So again, my name is Jesus Espinoza. I'm a resident librarian at the University of Michigan. I work in our learning and teaching department. So I do outreach, engagement, and instruction. I also do some work to support our diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives within the library. My residency is a 3-year residency, and we have a cohort of 3 residents. The first year is rotational. However, the rotations were kind of decided upon based on our own personal interests. So my kind of theme interest ended up being outreach and engagement. So the departments that I rotated within were all the projects were based around outreach and engagement. For the second and third years, the residents are placed in a department more permanently. So I'm placed in the learning and teaching department. And then our third year is also geared and focused towards a capstone project. As you can see, I really, really love boba. So if anyone in Michigan can refer me to some good boba places, that would be amazing because it's been a bleak moment trying to find some here.
Hi everyone, my name is Grace Adeneye, and as was said before, I'm the Pauline A. Young resident at the University of Delaware. So my residency was initially 2 years, but in keeping with best practices, it's been recently extended to 3. I do not rotate. My focus is and always has been on reference and instruction, which sort of drew me towards the position in the first place. And in my role, I work primarily with undergraduate students doing library instruction for freshman composition courses. And I have involvement in other projects that involve assessment and general reference work. The residency provides a great deal of support for professional development, and they've had a lot of time to make it into what it currently is. It began in 1984 as a 1-year residency, and it's changed and progressed a lot since then. We're also recruiting for a new resident. So if you have any questions about working at UD or know anyone that you think would be great for the new intake, feel free to reach out to me, email me, tweet me, inbox me, whichever you like.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Dye. I'm a resident librarian at West Virginia University. I'm still in the first year of my program, so my program's similar to Jesus's in terms of rotations. I'm totally jumping ahead of my script here, so let me pay attention to my script. Prior to my residency, I worked as a reference and instruction librarian at a small academic library. I specifically chose to apply for this residency because I knew that I could have access to resources and support that weren't available at my last position. The program here lasts for 3 years, the first of which includes 4 rotations in the departments of our choosing, so the residents' choosing. I specifically chose the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Support, Research Services, Access Services, and the Office of the Dean, because I could see opportunities in those departments to foster my interest. Each rotation is project-based, and I create portfolio at the end of my first year. Here at WVU, the Diversity Residency Committee also serves as the search committee. One cohort of 3 residents preceded me, but I'm the only resident at the moment. One of the things I really like about WVU is that mentoring is available to all new librarians, not just residents. So even if you're a seasoned librarian, I think it can be really helpful to have a mentor to ask institutional based. Can you guys hear me? Sorry, I'm paying attention to the chat. Okay, awesome. To ask institutional based questions. Okay, everyone can hear, awesome. So here are the learning outcomes, and I should read them. Participants will be able to articulate the specific challenges and benefits of diversity residencies, recognize the specific levels of structure and support needed to have a successful diversity resident program, and identify strategies for recruiting, retaining, and promoting librarians of color. One thing that we'd like to note is that we're not going to spend time explaining the need for diversity in our profession. We will work with the premise that equity, diversity, and inclusion are necessary because our profession has been historically homogenous. We won't discuss microaggressions either. We feel safe assuming that most diversity residents and people of color working in our fields experience microaggressions. We acknowledge that there are many types of diversity, but for the purposes of this webinar, we will focus on racial diversity in academic libraries specifically because that's the framework of diversity residencies. Later on in the presentation, we'll share more resources if you want to read more about equity, diversity, inclusion, and librarianship. So we're going to do our poll everywhere, and it doesn't look like it's working. Oh, is it working? Are you guys participating?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, it looks weird on my screen. Okay, cool. So basically, we wanted to know who was in the room, and I believe you can participate more than once because you could be a diversity, or you could have been a diversity resident and also supervise, like currently supervise or implement a residency program. So we just wanted to know who's here. Oh, maximum responses. Interesting. I'm so sorry about that. I guess we had a higher turnout than we expected. I'm so sorry about that. So be really quick for the next one, I guess. But it looks like most people have heard about diversity residencies, There's some that are diversity residents. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about the fullness of the poll. We're going to move on. So the next question we have is, does your institution have a diversity residency? It's so fun watching them change. So about half have diversity residencies. Some don't, and some are considering. Okay. Okay, it's full. Thank you. Wow. Yeah, you can feel free to talk about it in the chat. Thank you. Thank you so much. So this just is to give everyone a sense of who's here. And then I don't have any more polls until later on, but I think Jesus is going to take over from here. Thank you for participating.
Yes, thank you. So we very quickly wanted to go over position names. Sometimes these terms, the terms and names for these positions can get conflated. And of course, a lot of them will have natural overlaps. So we're going to differentiate between these particular descriptions for the purpose of our discussion. One of the issues that Jason Alston talks about in his research is that a lot of library workers would confuse diversity residents as interns. So we think it's important to distinguish between a lot of these terms. So internships generally are for graduate students and may work for credit, for graduate school credit. This may be paid or unpaid work, and this practical experience can be extremely helpful for the job search. Within a graduate school context, sometimes if they're part of the curriculum, they may also be referred to as practicums. Fellowships may be offered as a type of internship for students or as full-time temporary positions for recent graduates. For example, the University of South Carolina's School of Library and Information Science and the Thomas Cooper Library co-sponsor a Cooper Davis Fellow who is actively enrolled in the school and works at the library. North Carolina State University has a fellows program for recent graduates. Some are postdocs. Basically, you should read the descriptions for these positions carefully because they can vary, even within the same titles. And then finally, residencies are post-MLIS entry-level temporary positions. They generally focus on racial diversity, and for diversity residencies, they may be a member of the ACRL Diversity Alliance, which we will also be mentioning in this presentation. And generally, they are post-MLIS entry-level positions. And then a resource that has a good definition on their website is the ACRL Residency Interest Group, and we will share out a link to their resources as well. So we just wanted to bring up this definition of what a diversity residency is and kind of highlight some of the aspects that we wanted to focus on. So this definition is also taken from Jason Alston's work. And we wanted to focus on both the real work experience aspect and the retention aspect. So we wanted to emphasize that these positions are real librarians in every aspect, except for the fact that they're time limited, and there might be potentially issues around promotion or tenure in terms of rank. So at some institutions, those years that a resident librarian works as a resident librarian, they might not be considered for promotion or tenure at that same institution. And we also wanted to focus on the retention aspect. So there has been a lot of efforts to increase the diversity of librarianship, and we feel that the diversity residency is kind of the bridge between recruitment and retention, and we kind of see it as one of the first steps in the longer term goals of retention. In order for a diversity residency to be successful, there needs to be a large amount of support, mentorship, development, flexibility, room for exploration, and opportunities for leadership. We also wanted to go over what a diversity residency is not. We feel that it bears repeating. I think a lot of us as residents have probably encountered the I word here or there once in a while. So we just wanted to kind of to repeat, to emphasize that it is not an internship. A diversity residency should also not be a start or end to your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And what we mean by that is that a residency should not be the first step of your DEI plan, right? It should also not be the end goal of your DEI plan. We feel that it's best when an institution has a very well-structured and thorough diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility plan for which the residency program to maybe be an aspect of it, but certainly not the main focus or the bulk of that diversity plan. Similarly, diversity residency is not a solution to your institution's diversity problems. A resident should not carry the burden of fixing or addressing the diversity problem at your institution. And we feel that it needs to be the work of everybody at that institution.
Now, I'm going to kick off this section, this is Grace, by the way, about talking about a few professional groups with a focus on issues of equity and equality in librarianship. Now, the ACRL Diversity Alliance program unites academic libraries committed to increasing the hiring pipeline of qualified and talented individuals from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. So by working together as an alliance and thinking more broadly, the Diversity Alliance institutions will help diversify and thereby enrich the profession. There are a few guidelines, but there's a lot of latitude for institutions to develop their own diversity residency program. So I encourage you to go to that link and check out that information. But as far as we can tell, the Alliance does not openly publish information about different types of residencies. So if anyone here has this information or knows where we can find it, please send it our way because we're definitely interested in taking a look at it. The next group I'd like to talk about is the ACRL Residency Interest Group, or RIG. It's open to all. No ACRL membership is required, so it removes that barrier for this group of people. And from our experience, the leadership is largely driven by residents and former residents who want to build a community to support each other. They're all very active on social media and usually host events and meetups during professional conferences. Now, one such event is one we'd like to highlight today. It's a new members and mentorship discussion that features life after library residencies. The facilitator is Tuana Hodge, and it's on the 26th of February from 1 to 2 Eastern Time. This is meant to be an open mentorship environment for residents and for new librarians. The discussion, however, will not be recorded, so make sure you add it to your calendars. We're going to paste a clickable link into the chat box so you can take that away with you. And I'd like to just say, as a by the way, this is a great example of a tool used to recruit, retain, and promote librarians of color, tools that give professional development that are tailor-made to their experiences.
This is Jessica. I'm back. So what we're going to talk about now are some of the benefits of being a diversity resident. There are many benefits, we would say, but here are a few that stand out to us. They're actually entry level, and so diversity residencies are designed to be that way, and that means that applicants don't have to compete with seasoned librarians for the same job. It can be crushing to read amazing position descriptions and quickly realize that you don't have the necessary 3 years of supervisory experience when the job doesn't exactly require you to supervise anyone. That's a gross exaggeration, but I think that many people here would agree that job postings aren't always friendly to new graduates. We'll talk about this dynamic a bit more later on in the presentation, but we encourage hiring managers and selection committees to consider their motivations for requiring applicants to have specific years of experience. We acknowledge that it takes real and substantial effort encouraged by administration to build in on-the-job training for permanent positions. And regarding mentorship, many residencies offer this. It can be a residency-specific program or an institution-wide one like at WVU. Much of the literature about residencies and librarianship at large stress the importance of mentorship. Thanks, Teresa. I like that. Specialized training. Residencies offer early career librarians specialized training. This can be in the form of embedding residents in specific departments such as reference, instruction, cataloging, archives, and more. This can vary in terms of structure and intensity depending on the program and the residents in question. Rotations, sometimes. Some residencies feature rotations as a way to help early career librarians explore their interests. This can be especially helpful for those who don't have established interests yet, or perhaps not ideal for the early career librarian that knows what they want to do. Some residencies are geared towards filling institutional needs by hiring residents in specific departments. For example, some in our cohort are working as archivists or in scholarly communications or instruction. We've gotten the impression that this varies drastically depending on the program and the residents. Networking and peer support. Like many specializations in any field, diversity residents are drawn to each other. I'm particularly grateful that Grace, Jesus, and I met at the UNCG Library Diversity Institute. Otherwise, we might not be presenting this webinar. I know that many of us rely on the conversations and the relationships that we establish there. UNCG will have a Library Diversity Institute this year, but it's a grant-funded program, so there are no guarantees that future residents will have the same opportunities to meet face-to-face. In regards to professional development, residencies often provide additional support. For example, I have additional funds for the first year to attend national conferences, which is something I really haven't had the chance to do before. So now we're going to talk a little bit about diversity residency challenges. Some of these challenges are not exclusive to diversity residents, but may pose real issues for people of color in other library positions as well. And we're thinking staff, student workers, etc. Please keep these challenges in mind when building or maintaining residency programs. They're temporary, and so the temporary nature of our job can be precarious. Most residencies are 2 or 3 years, but we know of one resident who has a 1-year appointment. I know that I would be constantly worried about applying for my next job because the academic hiring process takes a very long time. Like many librarians in permanent positions, many of us made conscious decisions to relocate when we accepted the position. We suspect that residencies may not be feasible for many people for various reasons, such as financial situations, their ability to relocate, or perhaps for personal reasons. For some, the residency serves as gap years, so they're not applicable towards promotion and tenure, even though the resident is doing the same level of work expected of other librarians. Some institutions, like the University of Michigan, allow residents to undergo annual review and actually apply for promotion during the residency. So in theory, they could be leaving as associate librarians. We've been talking, we'd be interested to know if basically what rank or appointment residents are hired at their first post-residency position. If anyone has that information, please let us know. It can be really unclear. I don't think I put this on the slide. Oh no, I did. I'm just jumping ahead. Unclear positions. For many who start new residency programs, library staff and fellow librarians may not have a clear understanding of the intentions and expectations of the residency. Thus, administration and the residency coordinators need to do a good job of clarifying the value and intention of creating the program to the library at large. This will really shape the experience of the residents and the experience for the library. On the flip side, others might perceive the residents to be special, and that might create unnecessary tension. So it's a lot of navigating, I think. Being in only. That means that the resident might be the only person of color at the institution. This can be exacerbated for diversity residents at primarily white institutions. I think it can be tricky for residents to navigate, especially if the town or the city is also primarily white and there's a dearth of community or cultural resources. This one's a tricky one too. Residents should not be expected to serve on diversity committees or to represent diversity for the library. That can be difficult to navigate because residents are naturally interested in serving on equity committees. But it can lead to issues of tokenism or the concept of invisibility versus hypervisibility, discussed by Brown and Long in Authenticity versus Professionalism, Being True to Ourselves at Work in Pushing the Margins, and by Cook in Information Services to Diverse Populations. The invisibility versus hypervisibility dynamic describes a scenario in which people of color are invisible in a day-to-day life or day-to-day work until the organization decides to work on diversity issues. Then the person of color can be hyper-visible and be expected to speak on behalf of the racial or ethnic groups. This is not okay. Expectation versus reality. The reality of being a resident can differ from the expectations, sometimes even from what was communicated in the position description or the interview. Various factors such as timing, staffing, and resources significantly shape how the residency program runs. And now we are going to do another poll everywhere, and hopefully it doesn't fill too quickly, but this one I think you have to type in. So we just want to know how your resident or your institution addresses diversity, equity, inclusion at large, not just in terms of residency programs. We're thinking perhaps you do trainings, or maybe they're equity teams. Is it working? I'm not seeing anything populate. Oh, that's weird. Well, we'll type it in the chat box. Thank you. I'm so sorry. We're having, yeah, your library. We're having technical issues, so that's not working, but type it into your chat. Thank you. So how does, yeah, if someone could type in the question too. So we're going to move on.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about institutional support and structure, specifically about how your institution can support the hiring, the retention, and the promotions of librarians of color. So Catherine S. Donaldson at Oregon State said in a recent article that residencies as an entry point for professional librarianship. She said that a residency program will be the most successful at libraries that are already committed to addressing institutional racism. So libraries who have made this commitment are working off of, and they believe the fact that race does and can predict an individual's access, opportunities, safety, and well-being. Now, a lot of what I'm going to say in the next couple of minutes is taken from the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, also known as GAGE. It's a national network of government groups working to achieve racial equity and advance opportunities for all. They do have a library interest group, and the information I'm about to share is not original to me. It comes from their 2018 Racial Equity Plan, specifically for library use. Now, I want to say their focus is on public libraries. And public libraries have the distinction of often serving diverse populations. So it's even more important for them to have not only a plan, but an internal structure that supports people of color. We can learn a lot from them. And they presented at Midwinter, and Gordon Goodwin, who was their Midwest Regional Project Manager, said, "Racial equity means closing the gaps so that race does not predict one's success and also improves the outcomes for all. When race can no longer be used to predict life outcomes and experiences, we have achieved equity. Ignoring race and the role it plays in the human experience perpetuates implicit racism. Fair isn't always equal, and people who face extra barriers need additional resources to have the same quality of life and opportunities as others." So how do we address this as library institutions? GAGE suggests in their report that we, number one, normalize conversations about race, normalize safe spaces in which diversity and recruitment of diverse peoples can be talked about, and normalize a focus as an institution on these things. Number two, under that is cultivate high-level investment. And high-level investment can manifest as diverse collections and projects that will attract partners and people of color to your institutions. There's a lot of conversation around the decolonization of archives and also showcasing collections that represent diverse voices. And attracting people to your institution that way. Also, sometimes calling in consultants might be necessary, and establishing internal change teams. The Seattle Public Library has actually built racial equity work into team member work plans. It also has a role in outlining competencies for staff in this area. There are libraries who have dedicated whole conferences and summits and meetings specifically for management that speak to these issues. And diversity committees in an institution are also a great way of getting people involved. They tie to that idea of internal change teams. The second way he suggested to address this issue is to organize, to build capacity among staff and shareholders. And in this, partner with other institutions and communities that have equity and racial inclusion as their focus. Now, this is especially useful if you're at a university or an institution that doesn't have much racial diversity. Where are the people who have this concern in your community and on your campus? Reach out to them, make connections with them, and utilize partnerships with them in order to organize the type of support and structure that you need for librarians of color. Racial justice organizations are a great place to reach out to. And there are groups on campus and off campus that foster a peer learning experience that can have a very good effect on this at your institution. Now, the third word, and I've been practicing saying this all day, operationalize. Use racial equity tools. I don't have any time to read them here, but I suggest that you look at the Racial Equity Toolkit and also the Racial Equity Action Plans. It's a how-to manual produced by this group. And we're going to share a Google Doc of these links at the end of the presentation. Now that we've talked a little bit about changes to internal structure, we're going to look at a few actionable steps. My colleagues are going to expand on some of these a little bit more later, so I'm just going to speed right through them. GARE suggests that institutions analyze hiring processes for unintended barriers, require representative and diverse hiring bodies. One solution to these unintended barriers is that if you don't have the people there, get them from outside your institution to help. Get them from the community, get them from government organizations, get them from organizations that represent faith in your community. Next, assess staff onboarding, provide mentors, ensure pathways to opportunities and leadership. Jesus will discuss these in depth later. Assess whether communities of color and low-income communities have equitable access to community spaces, materials, technology, and support. Now, we might say in the university setting that the library isn't open to the public or has very limited access when it comes to the public. However, there are students and scholars of color and from other diverse backgrounds who need to be served. So thinking about partnerships with these individuals and these groups, creating grants and financial opportunities, and also marketing collections that would be of interest to a diverse population also creates equitable access. And also this extends to hiring staff who share similar cultural experiences and asking these groups what can be done to serve members of the population better. And also partnerships and alliances with campus groups that serve these populations are useful as well. And last but not least, provide safe ways for staff members of color to share feedback and challenges. And those ways should be anonymous if necessary. Now back to what I said before, GARE created a framework for advancing racial equity in library institutions with 3 ongoing overlapping stages. First, you normalize, then you organize, and then you operationalize. Now, I'd like to go back to that normalizing stage and emphasize that all these changes must start with conversation. Now, in his presentation at Midwinter, Godwin said, everyone has to become comfortable having uncomfortable conversations about race. In that same presentation, his colleague Amnitha Lonial, added that people of color are marginalized and often get burdened with the emotional labor of having these difficult conversations, often non-consensually. Hence the tweet that I've put up on the slide here called Diversity Meeting. On an institutional level, none of these will be more than superficial if we don't take it upon ourselves to start and to have these conversations. And I just want to express that we also need to be okay with the fact that on both sides, the conversation will often be awkward, it will often be messy, you may inadvertently offend someone, and you may be offended. I think defensiveness plays a huge part in not having these conversations because the first impulse is to protect yourself, to take it personally. Everyone wants to state categorically that they are not the problem, that they're not a racist, that they love everyone. And this is probably true. But we're also in a profession that is hailed as being one of introverts and socially awkward people. It's a stereotype I don't like that much, but it's been brought up. However, discomfort, for whatever reason it is, it's not an excuse for not addressing issues such as race and equity. These are issues that affect the quality of your colleagues' life and experiences. And these issues are at a systematic level that are bigger than your discomfort or my discomfort. So next, I think a default method is to sort of take a race-neutral approach. Lorna Peterson, while discussing race and librarian information studies, she said about the race-neutral approach, that everyone is the same approach, that it seems fair and it seems colorblind, but it leaves way too much opportunity for the reproduction of racial disparity. Institutions have embraced multiculturalism, but they haven't decentered white narratives. They've only celebrated our differences as so cool and exotic. Now, I'm someone who worked in public libraries for about 10 years before I moved to academic libraries, and I can't tell you how many flag displays I put up or international potlucks that I brought food to. It was quite a movement in the 90s and early thousands. However, this can result in unfair access and outcomes, and it can allow some of these bigger issues to get pushed under the rug. Librarian and social activist April Hathcock has said that it takes a self-congratulatory and complacent approach to the problem of diversity without addressing the problem of whiteness. If this problem is not addressed at the heart, diversity initiatives are going to fail. Gare said it's not about the individual and how not racist they are. It's about the system. It's bigger than the individual. And when institutions recognize and change this, that's when progress is made. So as we transition into the final segment of this presentation, I'd like you to take a few seconds just to reflect on these questions that the Gare report supplied that I thought were really important and really poignant to think about. I encourage you to read the whole report for more information, but the questions are, how does white cultural dominance impact people of color in your institution? What kind of culture shifts are needed? Under organize, who are the groups in your communities working towards racial equity, and how might you partner with them? And lastly, what action steps and measures will you take to achieve results?
Great. As we had mentioned earlier, Jessica went over a lot of the benefits of residencies and kind of the draw that brings candidates to residency positions. So we also wanted to talk about how can we apply some of the benefits of residencies to general librarian positions. So one of the ways is looking at job requirements. So I think we need to critically look at and examine what we actually need in librarian positions and not just try to fill it in with what we want or what we think would be great if the candidate had, but looking at what does the position actually need. Some questions to ask are, is a recent graduate capable of doing the job? And if yes, is those years of experience listed in the position really necessary? Another thing to talk about is degree requirements. I think this is a larger conversation happening in our field, but briefly, job postings, especially in academic libraries, we see a few that have now the MLIS as a preferred qualification instead of required. But I think we need to ask ourselves, who is this actually opening the door to? If not requiring the MLIS is opening these positions to PhDs and candidates with other master's degrees, but not opening it up to people that don't have an MLIS but have, 5-10 years of experience working as staff already in this field, then are we really diversifying? Are we really kind of making change if we're opening the doors to a certain population, but maybe keeping them close to other populations, especially if they're already in this field. Another aspect is mentorship. So library and university residency programs often have a residency component as part of the program. And this is something that I think can become a larger part of academic libraries. So if your institution, if your library does not have a mentoring program, a mentorship program, is that something that can become a possibility? Next is exploration. So can there be built-in flexibility in positions for librarians to learn new skills and kind of expand their experiences? So at our neighboring institution, Michigan State University, librarians have a secondary appointment, which is 10% of their position that is spent in another department. So this provides a really great opportunity for exploration, cross-training, and skills development in other areas that are separate from the main focus of the position. Oh, I see that it's 25%. Thank you, Jill. But yeah, that's something that I looked at and thought was really cool, to kind of have a position where your main focus is in one area, but you're able to explore and work in another department for a part of your position. And the next is peer support. So providing spaces and opportunities for new staff and new faculty recently hired to kind of build a cohort. I know that when I started here at the University of Michigan, there was 3 resident librarians that we started at the same time, but we also were included in the selector trainings for all new faculty at the library. So we had a good little cohort of about, I think, 7 to 8 people. And we did these trainings across the first maybe 4 or 5 months that we started. So that was just a natural way to have a cohort to, as we're entering a new institution for most of us, kind of navigating our way through both the library and the university. So providing those opportunities for new cohorts to get to know each other, even if they're not early career, if they're new to the institution or just new to a position, to learn about the institution together and have kind of that opportunity for peer learning and peer mentorship. And then we also wanted to point out this graphic, which is taken from the Safe House Progressive Alliance for Nonviolence. So I think we find that that it's very common for outwardly organizations to celebrate diversity and really want to bring in people of color, women of color specifically, into an organization and really kind of celebrate that change and wanting to change demographics. But when it comes to actually doing the work of diversity and trying to change the culture and structures, there's a lot of barriers that come into place. There's a lot of deflections on the part of institutions, and even a lot of retaliation, hostility towards the people that are trying to better the field, to remove structures and barriers that have remained for so long. We also wanted to mention that it might be sometimes easy to ignore the issues of sexism within our field because librarianship is female dominated. However, it's really important to understand that there is sexism in this field, and even just looking at the demographics by gender between generally all librarians, and then looking at the demographics of library leadership, they're not representative and they're not equal. So I think it's very important to keep in mind that just because it's a majority female field does not mean that there are not issues of sexism. And we also have to keep in mind and understand that the experiences of white women are not the same as the experiences of women of color in this field. So then we also wanted to talk about what we could be doing and how we can kind of move forward more generally, looking beyond residencies. So as we've talked about a lot before, mentoring and mentoring at different levels. Recently, a few of our colleagues had a panel at ACRL New York that talked about their experiences moving from staff in libraries to librarian positions in libraries. And I think that introduces a really, really kind of overlooked and great opportunity. Oftentimes when we're talking about recruitment and wanting to diversify the field, we talk a lot about building pipelines, creating opportunities, creating residency programs. But oftentimes, there are a lot of people that are already in this field that are already working in libraries, working as non-librarian staff, who we can maybe develop, we can maybe think about how to look inwardly in our libraries and see who's already in the door, who's already in this field, interested, doing the work, has the knowledge, but maybe are just lacking the degree. So how can we foster opportunities for people that might be interested in getting an MLIS or interested in advancing their career within librarianship who are already in the door? And then likewise, how can we foster opportunities for students in library school or recently graduated with an MLIS to start demystifying the profession, demystifying the hiring process, and kind of create opportunities to get experience. One really, really great example that we wanted to highlight and was also highlighted by GAGE in their report last year is that of St. Paul's Public Libraries. So St. Paul's Public Libraries set out to improve how they hire and retain people of color throughout the library system. Like many libraries, they found that part-time staff are disproportionately people of color when compared to full-time and librarian staff. As a first step, they sought internal candidates for existing vacancies and worked to develop an internal talent pipeline. To accomplish this, they increased the promotion of its professional development funds and offered staff monetary support for a library degree or credentials. The library additionally hired 17 to 20 summer interns, most of whom are youth of color, and they also assured representation on hiring committees. 1 year after setting these goals, 20 employees became benefits eligible. 9 of them were staff of color. 2 clerical staff are enrolled in library credential programs, and 2 summer interns have been hired as library aides. By the end of 2017, the library expects to hire or promote 8 additional staff of color full-time, which is exceeding their original goals. And finally, we also wanted to mention the focus on these kind of diversity initiatives from a recruitment aspect, but not from a long-term retention aspect. So April Hathcock, in her blog post titled, "Why Don't You Want to Keep Us?" points out the precarity of temporary positions for librarians of color and discusses how many institutions spend a lot of time and money. So just to join the ACRL Diversity Alliance is a cost of $500 for the institution. And of course, developing the structure and support for residency programs and temporary programs that exist. So there's so much investment from libraries on these temporary positions that occur on a cycle. But it also might be worthwhile to investigate why your institution chooses to go this route and whether or not it is hiring people of color in permanent positions and not just those temporary positions.
Okay, so my interest is really in retention, and I'm not going to read through my notes because we're running pretty short on time, but I'm really interested in how residency programs or just libraries in general, academic libraries, are helping librarians of color map their skill sets to be promoted, to get tenure. And so are their research skills, are there continuing education opportunities that are offered? It could also be interesting to highlight your tuition reimbursement or assistance programs for your residency program, so that, because a lot of people don't know that you can get a second degree from the institution, depending on the institution. And also, I'm interested in continuing education, so making sure that there are inclusive practices so that residents or people of color are also included in these programs. So we're going to move on.
Okay, I'm going to race through mine too. The first is including residents on search committees, which is mutually beneficial. For diverse hiring, you need a diverse search committee. And also on our side, it's illuminating for those who are mystified by the search process and also need to learn about techniques that they may be using to seek a full employment in future. Also, creating a more transparent interview process. Since residencies are for early career librarians, we should be intentionally transparent about the academic job interview process. Some institutions do a great job of this, but time for interviews, connections with people that might provide permanent employment, all of these will be useful, especially if the reality is that your institution may not make your resident a permanent hire. This, of course, varies, and we're not experts on the interview processes as well.
We were going to do a poll everywhere, but since it's not working, and it looks like you guys are putting in the chat, we'll rely on that for now, because I wanted to share some of our resources while you continue to ask questions. So we have a list of some more, so these are selected narratives or works by diversity residents themselves, because I think it's really important, if you're one of the populations that's thinking about developing a program, to get the perspective of the residents in question, so you can kind of understand that perspective. So this is a select list. There's a lot more. And there's also lots of lists of diversity or LIS diversity readings, and these are not explicitly racial diversity. They also talk about accessibility or other types of diversity as well. And I think we're going to share a list of a document with all of our links, so you should be able to get these. And these are oh, it says GAGE, but I think it's GARE. It's the tools that Grace mentioned, so advancing racial equity, and then we have a bibliography. But I guess we will go towards questions for now.
Okay, great. So I'm going to read some of the questions, and Rebecca, if you grab the rest of the questions that I didn't grab. A lot of people are asking about slides. We're going to put the links to the bibliography in the chat in a second, but if you guys want to share the slides, feel free to put them in the chat as well. So the first one, which I think might have been covered, but a specific example of a DEI plan, a link to it. And I mean, for the sake of time, if someone wants to drop that into chat, are there any studies that investigate permanent employment outcomes for resident librarians versus librarians of color who have not participated in such a program? I.e., do we have evidence that these programs are actually leading to more positive outcomes for the profession?
I don't know.
I can take that. There are several people who have written about this on both sides. One that immediately comes to my mind, possibly because we were with him in North Carolina, is Jason Alston. So I would encourage you to look up his work. We're all librarians, so I'm sure it'll be easy for us to find. And he's written some amazing work on this subject. So I would encourage you to check it out. I don't want to start listing specifics so as not to take too much time.
Okay, great. And if we don't, we're going to try to get to as many questions as possible, but if we want to share a job ad, and I think someone might have answered this, is there a listserv to discern the answer to? I think it was answered in chat. So outside of grant funding, how are residencies funded when there are budget problems in the library?
That's a good question. I assume they either find the money or they don't have a residency program. I don't know the answer to that one.
I know for ours, they I think initially had the funding for one, maybe two positions. And then at the end, we're able to, I think through the dean's office, we're able to find additional funding for all three residents. And I think our residency coordinator is right now going through the process of figuring out how to, of securing permanent funding, and then also looking at how many they can host for the next cohort.
I also think that something important to consider is the fact that we often have these diversity residency programs as a way of getting librarians who have applied for jobs but not been able to get into these institutions the quote unquote normal way. So I think that institutions should also look at their hiring practices and commit to hiring librarians of color in permanent positions from the get-go. Diversity residencies they're really important and they're really valuable, but we also have to look at our permanent hiring practices because there are positions. So who are you hiring and how are you making sure that people are getting equitable opportunity to come into these positions?
Okay, great. And Lynn asked, do any of you know what kinds of things, if any, host institutions are doing to assess and address diversity in hiring retention other than simply hosting residents?
No. I don't know. I think this is due to the fact that the residents talk to each other in our cohort, and we have questions. And so these are questions that we're wondering ourselves. Like, honestly, we're new librarians, we're trying to figure these things out, and we don't know where to look. So we want to know if anyone here knows that as well.
Okay, great. And some people are putting their opinions in chat as well. So Natalie asked.
Sorry, if I could just cut in on that. For me, I also think that it's looking at other types of libraries, which is why we mentioned public libraries in this presentation. So libraries that are maybe outside the scope of the United States or libraries that are not academic libraries, and looking at what they've done to support librarians of color and to support diversity in their institutions also helps as well.
Okay. And Natalie asked, did you pursue this assignment because of its goals in view or because this was what was available to you out of school? I.e., did you pursue a residency program?
I didn't know they existed when I was in library school. I took a full-time position as a reference instruction librarian, and then I saw a job posting and I applied for it because it was the only one that had up to 5 years like out of library school. So I felt like it was my time. I had to apply. So I didn't intend to, no.
I think for me, during grad school, I focused almost exclusively on digital preservation. My graduate assistantship was in digital preservation. And as I was figuring out that I was graduating and looking at jobs and interviewing, I was like, I don't know if I actually want to do this for the rest of my life or for the next 5 to 10 years. So then I started looking at what other positions were out there. I had some experience in access services. I wanted to kind of build more experience in instruction and wanted to work more in outreach engagement. So I started to look at residencies for the development aspects, the exploration aspects, and just to kind of broaden my skill set.
And for me, I was fresh out of library school and also making a transition from paraprofessional to professional. So it was a good opportunity for me. I couldn't get in otherwise.
So we're getting close to 1 o'clock. I have been putting the assessment in there, and I understand some people might need to leave. So I am gonna just tell you some stuff on wrap up, and then we'll stay in the room and continue to ask questions if that's okay with the presenters until we get kicked out. And I also tracked as many questions as I possibly could. But Thank you to Jessica, Grace, and Jesus, as well as my co-moderator, Rebecca, from the ACRL ULS Professional Development Committee. I'd also like to thank Elois Sharp and Sophie Skinner from ACRL. Remember that we will send a link to the recording for this session when it is available. I've been putting it periodically in there, but the assessment, please fill it out for us to know how this went. And the upcoming webinars for the ULS professional development include Beyond Citation Counting, Metrics and Altmetrics for Demonstrating Scholarly Impact. So be on the lookout in your email for that. And it's on Tuesday, March 19th at 11 a.m. Central Time. So the committee will provide more information about these programs starting probably in late February. And again, thank you so much, Jessica, Grace, and Jesus. This has been great. So if, again, you guys are okay with continuing, I'll ask the next question. Sandra asked, I wonder what ideas there might be for smaller academic libraries beyond residency for diversity and inclusion efforts.
I think it would depend on your institution, where you are, and what you hope to do. And if you have perhaps vacancies to hire, you know, a person of color, or like to be more open to hiring for vacancies, or I don't know. Talking in the community, assessing the community is the most important step, I think. So make sure you address that.
I think one of the beauties of working at a smaller institution is an opportunity to do more specific and more sort of intimate community projects. And that can also be a way of attracting talent that is quite diverse to your institution. What collections do you have? What does the community around you look like? If you don't have the distraction of sitting with hundreds and thousands of students every semester that you have to serve, you really have an opportunity to do things much more creatively. So just looking at those opportunities, and like Jessica said, assessing and creating your learning outcomes. What do you want to come out of this? Might be a good place to start.
Okay, so I think various people in chat answered him, but Johnny asked, how can an older person of color network towards the next stage of their career?
That's a great question. Get involved in different, I mean, I don't really know. I'm trying this out myself, so I don't have good advice. Join groups, volunteer for committees. Those are probably like the boring answers.
Yeah, I'm with Jessica on this one. A lot of my growth, and I'm not ancient, but I feel like I came into librarianship quite late. It was almost 10 years after my BA that I entered librarianship. And something that really sort of accelerated me was making connections with professional groups and finding a niche, finding what I love to do and concentrating on building that, concentrating on making connections with the people in that specific niche that I had chosen. That sort of helped to sharpen my focus and to move me forward and sort of make up for some of that lost time.
So Christy asked, how many residents are former staff with multiple years of experience versus LIS graduates with graduate experience only? Is that experience different in your opinion?
I can only talk about our cohort that we met in person, and it seems like a lot of people did have either staff to librarian, like they did that staff to librarian transition, or they had applicable like teaching experience. But then there were some that were fresh out of library school. I couldn't tell you a ratio, but there was a mix. We're actually trying to compile information about ourselves at the moment, so maybe I'll know in a few months. So I don't actually know. And at large, I don't know, or even in terms of just residents in general. I see Jesus migrated.
Sorry, I had to change rooms.
Jesus, where are you?
I guess the room was booked after. I thought it wasn't.
Sorry.
You're doing
So
Sorry.
I think that the last question I had, which I think there might be a typo in it. I saw some conversation going on in the chat. So if you're still in here, Elena, you can re-put it in. But Elena asked, if we have no promotion path, should we still be trying to recruit people of color? Or is that just encouraging them to get locked into a dead end? So that was the question.
If there's no promotion path.
Is that promotion path within a residency or just no promotion path in general? Or...
Yeah, I think Elena might have left. If anyone has more clarification in the chat, just let me know.
Okay.
And again, so Elena said no promotion path in general.
I would find another job, but that's just me. But that's tricky because there are so many factors. There are a lot of factors.
That's how the Sorry, if that's how your organization is set up, then I mean, I think you can. I don't think that should be a reason to not try to recruit people of color, but it is something that people will look at when they're looking at job postings and interviewing.
You guys are asking very difficult questions. I feel like, I don't know anything about that.
So that is the last question I could see in the chat. If I mentioned it before, okay, Josh just put in a question. As you mentioned, our profession is overwhelmingly white and there is racism in the profession, even though we rarely talk about this in order to preserve the comfort of those in power. This can derail the effectiveness and long-term future of diversity initiatives. In other words, you need the blessing of those in power to proceed with diversity initiatives. Yet there seems to be hesitance to expose the discriminatory aspects of our profession because that would put people of color at risk since they are dependent on those in power. What are your thoughts?
I have thoughts on this. I was really upset, I think, as most of us were after what happened to April Hathcock at ALA Midwinter. And so I had discussions with people I knew who were invested or interested in this. And so I'm trying to get that discussion out to the institution at large because I think it's an important conversation to have. I'm not very confident that I know how to do it, but obviously that's a risk I'm taking, and that's a thing I'm putting on myself because I think it's important. But if you recognize it, doesn't matter who you are. If you're a resident, if you're a person of color, if you're not a person of color, start talking about it. Like Grace said, it's going to be uncomfortable. I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to do my best.
I also think that there are different types of voices out there that make a difference. There's people who are talking about it in a social activist sort of way. There are people who work with libraries as consultants, and there are people who go to conferences and present on things like this. There are also people who hold institutes for managers. And if conversations on diversity and inclusion and equity are integrated into the conversations that the ALA is having on the highest level, because generally in North America, ALA sets the standard, right? So they need to do as much as they can to make sure that these institutions that are aligned with them and these institutions that are connected with them realize that this is an integral part of librarianship. And yeah, that's all I have for the moment.
So Octavio follows up on Elena's question. Could the host of the diversity residency serve as an incubator to give meaningful on-the-job training so that residency participants could go elsewhere for job opportunities, recognizing there may not be promotion opportunities as the residency location?
that is a reality for some. That's the structure and framework for some residencies, that they're only going to be there for 3 years. There's no promise of a job after that, and they're supposed to do on-the-job training. So I would say that is a thing that exists. Yeah, I'm reading down. She says it's hard to constantly encourage great people to leave after a few years because you can't offer them more. Selfish on their part. Yeah, it's tricky because it's a cyclical thing, and you spend a lot of time, resources, and energy on training someone, and then they leave. And so it depends on your institution, your institutional needs, I think. Why do you have the residency program in the first place?
Yeah.
So are there any other questions? I've been trying to track comments. Of course, many people said thank you and that they are now going to go and share this presentation, the things they learned with people in their library. So thank you, Jessica, Grace, and Jesus again for a truly great webinar. If anyone else has any questions, now is the time. I'm going to do my ACRL part and put this assessment in there one more time. Octavio also asked again, what will ACRL do to help move this conversation forward? I don't know if any of us can answer that.
Yeah.
But ideally
I
have
will
more
not venture to speak
programs
for
like
ACRL.
Yeah. So it's recorded. Maybe ACRL will watch this. And then Octavio says, Elena, are your residency opportunities more in the paraprofessional area? So if Elena is still in there, you can answer that in the chat. And I think we're probably getting towards the end. Are there any final comments from our amazing presenters?
None, but thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to us. And if you have any questions that come up later, our contact information was in the in the first slides, and then you have our name, so it should be pretty easy to find us.
So thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you at other webinars. And thank you again to all of our amazing presenters. And I think we'll be ending the session.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.